Welcome to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't, a podcast dedicated to helping you create the relationship you truly want.
Welcome. Enhance your relationship. Key couple skills for lasting love. Relationships take work, like anything worthwhile. This episode is going to help you develop skills as a couple. Just like the work of flossing your teeth is better than just brushing, there are skills one or both of you can learn to improve your relationships. Building trust is not an act of magic. It is built on being honest about disagreement and transparency. Creating a solid foundation that helps both of you feel like you are a team is a huge accomplishment that everyone can create if your relationship is a priority. If you want a long-term relationship, then you need skills to navigate the differences, misunderstandings, and unspoken resentments all couples have to deal with. Two people will always be different in personality, values, and growing up experiences. Many of us end up in a relationship with our opposites. If you are open to learning the right tools, then disagreements are manageable because there is empathy and mutual respect and a willingness to understand each other when life throws the bad stuff our way. Practicing couple skills helps make a relationship more satisfying. One simple question I often ask is for couples to take 20-minute walks together 3 times a week. Just doing that improves connectedness. You both need room to breathe when you have a disagreement, and you can assess how you both can lead to more honest conversations. Like, are we spending beyond our means? What can we do to improve our sex life? These are questions you can build up to because there is an ordinary routine in place to talk and walk together. Thinking about how to improve couple skills fosters both partners being more intentional. It's too easy for your relationship to slide to the back burner and keeping your couple relationship a priority. Couples who decide to invest in their relational skill building are more likely to experience deeper connection and long-lasting satisfaction. You know, I always like to pop in a bit of research. Research determined in a diverse population in 2022 by Adler, Bader et al. That couple relationship skills offered significant gains to couples in their study. Then there is Dr. John Gottman, who in the 80s was able to identify specific behaviors that predicted relationship outcomes. He discovered that certain negative behaviors such as criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling were particularly damaging to relationships when they occurred repeatedly over time. He called these the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There are not only negative behaviors to avoid, but positive behaviors to help. Skills such as showing appreciation, fostering gratitude, and spending quality time together contributes to a sense of shared joy. So try that 20-minute walk 3 times a week. Couple skills also help partners grow together over time. Relationships are dynamic, and as individuals evolve, their partnership must adapt to new challenges and opportunities. Having skills that nurture growth, whether it's through supporting each other's personal development or learning how to maintain intimacy during busy life phases, allows the relationship to thrive across all the different stages of life. Couples who prioritize developing these skills are better equipped to sustain a healthy and fulfilling relationship over the long haul. Today's guest to help us explore these skills is Dr. Betsy Chung, who has just published the Couples Skills Workbook, which is chock full of practical ideas, powerful insights, and helpful exercises. Dr. Betsy is a licensed clinical psychologist, relationship expert, and media contributor who specializes in helping people achieve and maintain healthy relationships. You can follow her pearls of wisdom on Instagram at lovealways.Dr. Betsy. Lucky are we to have her with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Rhoda.
So my first question, your first chapter is all about helping couples understand their need for emotional security, which I thought was a really important and smart way to begin. Please share with my audience why this is so important.
So, I'm really big on, when I work with clients, helping clients really understand and make sense of everything that I talk about. So the first thing I think that everybody really needs to understand about emotional security, or security in general, is that this is tied to us as human beings. As humans, biologically, we're all equipped with this nervous system that helps us interact with the world. So, when, generally, we're supposed to be able to, be, safe. And when we're safe, we feel calm. When we are under a state of stress or threat, then our nervous system naturally kicks us into gear to do something about that threat. So what ends up happening is that, when we lose the ability to, be calm, and when we're under a state of stress, then what happens is that we're only focused on protecting ourselves and defending ourselves. And that affects the way that we make decisions, not just for ourselves, but also in relationships as well. So what security really is that security kind of transcends safety. So like when we feel safe, of course, we're able to be calm and, have access to the part of our brain where we're able to think very clearly about things, weigh pros and cons. But so when we feel secure, that doesn't just mean that, okay, I feel safe in the moment. It's basically almost like a predictable thing where it's like, I feel safe and I also trust that I'm safe in the future as well. So what emotional security really is that, let's just say that you're in a relationship with your partner. That basically means that even though I don't know what's going to happen in the future, I trust this person to have my back. So 10 years from now, 50 years from now, we're going to grow old together. And, through our challenges that we face together, I've built trust with this person through conversations we've had together. I trust that this person's going to listen to me, listen to my needs. And we're going to work together, because we've done such a good job working together, that I know that if anything bad were to happen to me in the future, I can depend on this person to be there for me. So that's what emotional security is really about, is that I don't have to frequently be worried about what's going on in front of me, worried about what's going to happen to me in the future. And that provides this kind of sense of safety where it's like, okay, then that means that I don't have to worry about threat all the time. I can tend to my life. I can, tend to my relationship in a positive way.
And my thought would be that if you're not emotionally secure, you're going to crash into your defense system a lot more quickly, which makes it really hard to have honest dialogues with each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, that a lot of that comes from, our childhood relationships. So, if we really think about childhood, children are completely defenseless. We don't have any ability to take care of ourselves. So we're completely reliant on our parents. And, the way that our parents treat us, the way that they communicate with us, and this isn't always talking about abuse whatsoever. The truth is that there's no such thing as a perfect parent, right? So as much as I'm talking about this stuff, this is not to say that it's like, oh yeah, I'm always going to know what to do. I'm never going to make any mistakes or anything like that. But generally, though, I think that insecurity in our future relationships come from insecurity in our childhood relationships, where maybe there were certain ruptures that happened between parent and child that were never repaired. So I think that reparation is really important because, let's just say that, mom comes home from work and she's very, very stressed out. The child is not going to know that when mom is, kind of in one of her moods and is like, oh, don't bother me kind of moods, that, it's like, oh, it must be because mom was stressed out at work. For children, they have such a limited framework to understand what's going on in their lives that it ends up being very personal to them. So, in that same example, if mom were to come home in a bad mood and maybe communicate to their child consistently in a way that feels bad to the child, then the child will experience this disconnect with their parent. And if they don't understand what that's all about, they'll kind of take it upon themselves to say like, okay, like what can I do then to fix that relationship with my parent? And what that ends up doing when our parents aren't able to sit us down and say like, you know what, this is not about you. Mommy or daddy, like, there's sometimes a lot of things going on at work, and sometimes that makes my emotions come out in that way. And that I didn't really mean to do that to you. That's what a repair would look like, where the children would then be able to understand, like, okay, it's not me. The world isn't unsafe. There are reasons why mom might come home that way. And so the more that we're able to make sense of relationships and things that happen to us, the more comfortable and safe we feel, about relationships. And we also kind of expect that in our future relationships. However, if there were lots of like ruptures and disconnect, then what ends up happening is that we start to expect those things in relationships and view relationships in that way too. We'll behave in relationships where it almost like confirms that like, okay, yeah, like, that's probably what's going to happen. My partner came home in a bad mood and, I must have done something to upset them.
So, are there other ways that growing up with insecure caregiver relationships also contribute to that fragility in the current relationship? You described the one just now, but are there other ways that can happen? Because I want the audience to really think about their growing up experiences. And I loved how you talked about it, because it is about ordinary moments. It's not about smashing your head into the sink because you got lice or something. It's really, and it just happened with my grandson. We were playing a game and I asked him to just slow down a little bit so I could figure out what the question was that he was asking me. And he just got very disturbed about it, ran away, and, I had to go out in the swing with him and talk to him and say, I was simply asking for a little bit of kindness because I really didn't understand what the question was that you were asking me. And I felt like he also eavesdropped on us as we were talking as adults about what was going on, which I knew he was. I think my son thought he wasn't, but I was pretty sure he was. And I really think he heard a lot of caring around that table and how we were describing it, as well as my conversation with him as an individual. And I know growing up in the 50s, repair was not an issue. That was not something people thought about. But I think repair is such an important word. And I just wondering if you had any other examples.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you even brought up this example because, children, they're like sponges. They absorb everything, right? So we're not even just talking about the direct communication that we have towards children. We're also talking about like, children are watching us, and and we're models for, again, like what they expect people to be like, and how they expect to be treated. So, for example, I have clients who might be extremely extremely afraid of judgment. And, when I explore with them what could be going on, sometimes the source really just comes from like, well, growing up, all I heard was, my parents talking very badly about their siblings, and it would lead to these like, unrepairable, conflicts. And the message that I got was like, whatever they said, I can't be like that. So again, children, they're very, very perceptive, and what they do is that they're constantly, if they don't feel safe, what they do is they look for ways to feel safe again. So if again, I'm going to listen to my parents talk badly about people, like, okay, if I do that, if I behave that way, that means that maybe my mom's not going to love me. And so I'm going to be sure not to behave in that way anymore. And so, as much as some parents might try to protect their children, and not affect them, directly, we also need to make sure that we are not modeling certain behaviors, and careful about sometimes the way that we talk about things, because they are going to pick up on those things and they're going to interpret those things, and if we don't teach them how to interpret it in a healthy way, that becomes their framework for how to approach life from that point out.
And there's just so much, as you said, absorption that goes on. And so it's really a complicated picture. And it doesn't mean being perfect all the time, but maybe it means being honest about strengths and weaknesses. One of the messages I give to the grandkids all the time is we're all good and bad. We all make mistakes. We all do have things we can improve and grow. And I think that's such an important message, because kids are so polarized with the ideas of being a good kid or a bad kid, and they don't have that middle ground of, we've got some between 1 and 10, there's 4, 5, 6, and 7, and they can't think that way. So yeah, I think it's really, I love the fact that you began with emotional security. What can help us have enough emotional security to access the part of our brain that helps us consider the other person's feelings instead of drowning only in our terrible feelings and beliefs?
Yeah. So something that I lead into after I talk about emotional security in my book is basically how to access that feeling of safety. Because again, when we feel safe, we're able to be in a calm state. We're able to make good decisions, think about things before we do them. And so I think that learning how to identify these different functional states is really important. For us growing up, unless, our parents were really good at talking to us about these things, we have no idea that we're constantly switching back and forth between this calm state and this stress state, right? So something I hear a lot, for example, is, I used to work with a lot of college students. And one big issue that they would come in all the time is that, like, why is it that I study and study and study, and the night before my test, I just, I feel like I'm going to ace it and I feel so good. But once I sit in my class, I just draw a blank. Well, that's a perfect example of that, you being in a stress state where, again, like you're more concerned about passing the test versus being able to kind of calm yourself down and really be able to access that information that you that you studied the night before. And so we're constantly, shifting from one state to the next. And, the more, I guess, I tend to use the word trauma, so we're not necessarily talking about all of that. A lot of people now know the difference between like big T versus little t traumas. So we're not always talking about those big T car accident, natural disaster kind of traumas. We're talking about these little T relational kind of traumas. And so, what happens is that the more little traumas that we experience as children, the more often that things are going to trigger us and cause us to kind of subtly switch into that stress state. And learning how to recognize, like, okay, when I'm in a stress state, that's when, for instance, like when I'm arguing with my partner, I'm going to have a lot of negative thoughts about them because under that stress state, again, we're just trying to protect ourselves and trying to survive. So whatever is around us is going to be scrutinized, and we're not going to be in a mood to want to connect with the other person and to listen to what they have to say because, that's not conducive to survival, right? If you have a bear charging at you, you're not like, oh, well, what should I do? Is this a brown bear or is this a white bear? Like what you're doing is you are just jumping to defense. And so what happens is that when we are in this stress state and we don't recognize it, then we're a lot more likely to approach our partners in a way that might even trigger them and trigger a stress state in them, which is what leads to all of that escalation when there are disagreements. By being able to recognize, okay, like here are the signs, and everybody's signs are different, everybody's triggers are different. And I think that that's also what therapy helps to do is like, okay, like, well, where does this come from? And how does this cause you to behave? Okay, so this is a sign that maybe you're not in the best state right now to have this conversation with your partner because by pointing fingers, by blaming them, by, being very defensive and refusing to hear them out, what you're doing is you're triggering them. However, by being able to recognize, well, sometimes though, I am able to hear my partner out. Sometimes, we are able to have these good conversations, and being able to recognize like, okay, like I am a lot more open in those moments. And so there are things that we can do to, not just recognize when we're under a state of stress, but to kind of bring us back to this state of calm. Those are typically what we might call coping skills, right? So maybe if, you guys are both in the heat of the moment, taking a walk would be a good idea. Maybe it's okay to separate rooms, right? Like, okay, I'm going to just go back to the bedroom and just kind of calm myself down until I'm able to feel like, okay, I think I'm ready to talk. Sometimes this could take 20 minutes. Sometimes we might even need a day, right? But the whole goal though is to be able to learn how to recognize, am I in a state to be able to talk through this with my partner right now?
And there's something so important about understanding what you're describing is shuttling back and forth, being able, when you recognize a stress state, shuttling over to being able to soothe yourself and calm yourself so you can be more open and vulnerable. And that so many people get stuck in the stress state. And I'm always talking about shuttling. It's not that you might not continue a conversation and you think you're in a calm state and then you retreat back to the stress state. But to say, wait a minute, give me a moment, let me just take a breath here. And recognizing what it is that you're doing that contributes to an inability to shuttle to that calmer place. And I think that's just a wonderful way to talk about it because we always feel like we're stuck. We're stressed, we're stuck. It doesn't seem like you can go anywhere. And yet you can if you think about it and get some skills and learn.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, it's very surprising what we're actually capable of when we're in a calm state. I want to share a quick example. Several years ago, so for me, I always grew up to be extremely independent, and I'm that person that I don't ask for help. I am highly efficient. So, I assume that I do things better than other people. And so I'm just going to take on all these responsibilities. So several years ago, and this was really a turning point in my relationship with my husband, because I was going through a very, very stressful experience with my family during that time. It was just, it was probably the most stressful thing that we have ever dealt with at the time. And so for me, I was just so overwhelmed with not just work, but also dealing with this family issue. And taxes were coming up, and that's also something that's really stressful for me too. And at this time, I still didn't really trust my husband because I still had that thought that I'm more efficient than him, and I know how to manage stress better than him. And so finally, one day, I was just so overwhelmed that he saw me break down. I'm not a big crier, but when he saw that I was just so overwhelmed that I started crying, and he's like, what's going on? And I just listed everything out, and he was like, do you think that can my sister help with some of this stuff? I know that she would be happy to help you sort out some of these things. And in that moment, I was just like, oh my God, it never even occurred to me that asking somebody to help me with this thing, because his sister, she kind of does personal assistant stuff for people. And it never even occurred to me that maybe I could pass off some of these things and, just pay her some money to help me deal with these things. I didn't end up doing that. But I think what that really made me do was it made me have to kind of get out of my own way and, recognize in that state of stress, I wasn't thinking about other solutions. And so when I, actually, happened to be so overwhelmed that I had to talk to my husband about it, he was able to offer me this solution that had never come to mind for me before. And after that point, I really started to lean on him more because I was just like, okay, this is teamwork here. He's got a lot of, wonderful ideas as well. And I need to sometimes give him space to at least help me brainstorm.
Yes. That's a great example. It really is. And I think lots of us in the helping profession suffer with that independent streak.
Yep.
Intimacy requires bringing down our defenses and being more open and vulnerable, which the television show Shrinking really explores with all of its characters, I must add, 3 of whom are therapists, though I don't agree with everything they're doing. How can we help our partners by reducing our defenses and being more open? I particularly liked you suggesting we begin with small intentional risks to build tolerance for vulnerability.
Yeah, so, we all enter relationships with some level of baggage. This kind of goes back to our mini discussion earlier about there's no such thing as perfect parenting. So if we were raised, let's say, to feel that our feelings were always invalidated, unheard, misunderstood, it's very easy for us to develop these knee-jerk reactions to defend ourselves because what we're expecting, when our partners, let's say, come to us with certain issues, we're expecting, to maybe be attacked or to feel misunderstood. And what ends up happening is that we're not really giving our partners the opportunity to express their concerns and and to really kind of listen to them and hear out what's not working in the relationship. And and so the same thing can happen to us as well, is that we also might be afraid to express our feelings and our needs with the expectation that maybe our partners are also going to be invalidating and misunderstanding us. So, though that's an example of how maybe sometimes our childhood interactions with our caregivers can really interfere with our ability to have these vulnerable conversations with our partners. So some things that we want to do to build that tolerance, first of all, the tolerance for being able to communicate is like you just kind of like, sharing little thoughts at a time, little feelings at a time. Really thinking about, okay, how do I want to approach this issue? Is this, such a big issue? And if it is, should I break it down into small steps just to kind of see how my partner responds to it? But on the receiving end as well, not just talking about being the person to be vulnerable, but also being receptive to our partner's vulnerability, is that we also need to learn how to listen and not immediately react. Because again, if we're constantly in a defensive state, like let's say that, your partner, feels like they can rarely ever talk about things that bother them about you. That problem will never get resolved if every single time you defend yourself and it's like, well, I was just trying to do this, I was just trying to do that. Because when that happens, then your partner's going to feel invalidated. And that's going to cause both to not want to address these kinds of issues because it's going to lead to argument. So I think that, we just want to always try to come from a perspective, and as hard as it can be, we want to come from a perspective that my partner's bringing up these issues, or I'm bringing up these issues because, every disagreement is an attempt to preserve the relationship, right? Nobody ever brings up issues in relationships expecting that, I want to fight. We're bringing up these issues because there's something that's not working well, and we are trying to make it work well. And so the more that we're able to come from that perspective and, try to just simply listening does not mean that is the truth right there and you didn't fight against it. And so that's going to, be the truth now. Listening just simply means okay, I'm going to suspend my contribution for a little bit just to hear what they have to say. I still have, an opportunity to share my side after that. So yeah, I think that, by being able to kind of take these small little risks in relationships, in conversation, over time, we're able to feel okay, I think I feel safe, going a little bit more.
Yes, and I'm always telling people that it's really important to not let unspoken resentments build up, that they'll destroy relationships, and being able to have hard conversations. And I like how you talk about it, though, to begin with some small stuff and then build up to some bigger things. I like that. Please describe emotional attunement and explain why that matters as a couple skill and what we can all do to improve it.
So attunement is really about being able to be in sync with how your partner feels and not how your partner makes you feel. So I think a lot of times, again, even kind of going back to what we were just talking about right now, if our partners come to us with something, sometimes it could be hard to hear, right? We're being confronted with something that our partner's dissatisfied with, and that can feel like a threat to the relationship, right? So what ends up happening is that when we react to the way that to something that they're telling us versus trying to understand where they're coming from, then we kind of miss the whole point of being able to develop understanding. And so I think that, by being able to attune to the way that our partners feel, it really opens them up and gives them the opportunity to feel safe to share more. So again, if my partner comes to me and is like, sometimes the way that you talk to me, it makes me feel really bad about myself. If right away my response is going to be like, well, I don't mean to talk to you in that way. That's not my intention. That's your fault for feeling that way. Of course, that's going to cause my partner to shut down and wonder, like, okay, well, am I wrong about this situation? Versus really being able to listen to my partner and maybe even understand from their perspective, what they were raised with, right? Like maybe their parent talked to them very harshly. And so by them being able to kind of, if I'm not less defensive about it, they're going to be able to maybe talk about those types of things and give me better understanding from here on out of how to interact with them in a way that feels safe for them. So emotional attunement really allows us to understand our partner's needs on a deeper level. Sometimes we're not always going to be able to do that, and so one thing that we can do to improve our attunement of our partners is by being curious, right? So I don't really understand that response. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? So once your partner is able to tell you more about it, then maybe in the future you have a deeper understanding, like, okay, like I just made my partner feel like that again.
And even thinking of it with the image of opening doors instead of closing them. Because there's so many ways we close doors on conversations out of defensiveness. And we really have to work at opening doors because that's what leads to understanding.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What is important about improving our ability to acknowledge our partners, which is different than emotional attunement?
Humans are social animals at heart. And so, we feel the safest when we are part of societies, we're part of communities, because when things get too overwhelming for us, it feels safer when we can rely on other people to carry some of our burdens for us. And so that is ultimately going to also contribute to this idea of emotional security. So, again, we were kind of talking before about like, oh, what's going to happen 10 years down the line? As long as we feel like, okay, I feel accepted, I feel a sense of belonging, I feel important in this community, then we don't have to worry so much about what's going to happen 10 years down the line, because we trust that the people in our lives are going to be able to be there for us. And so I think that, acknowledging our partners helps them feel that sense of belonging. Because basically, what we do is that, we are acknowledging their contributions. So going back to the example that I gave before, where, again, before I was like very, very highly independent. And I thought that that was what my husband would love me for, is that I don't ask him for anything. But in reality, I think that probably made him feel like he wasn't contributing enough in the relationship and I wasn't depending on him enough. And so it made me wonder, does he feel important enough? Does he feel replaceable? Or does he know that he has these wonderful contributions? And so I think that sometimes acknowledging our partners, when they have contributions, or maybe even caring about what they have to say. It's like, well, what do you think about this? This is what I think the best way would be. Like, what are your thoughts about it? What that does is that it makes them feel important. It makes them feel like their opinions matter, and that we're willing to listen to them, so that they're also able to feel secure too, because their needs might be different from ours and their perspectives on things might be different from ours.
And I think acknowledging helps people to feel really seen. And I think that so often it's about feeling seen that really matters. And you describe unconditional acceptance as another relationship requirement. Tell my audience more about that, which helps with sharing and vulnerability.
So this one I think is a really big one, because I think that oftentimes the kinds of messages that we hear, again, directly or indirectly growing up, really impact our ability, like I guess impact the way that we view ourselves. And so unconditional acceptance is really about allowing our partners to feel like they can be their full authentic selves and that we're going to love them anyway. Now, this does not mean, though, because I think that a lot of times people confuse, unconditional acceptance with total tolerance. I think that that's completely different, because I think that with unconditional acceptance, all we're doing is we are not criticizing or chastising our partners for being the way that they are. We're trying to be understanding of them. And once we can show this level of understanding, they're going to have more courage to show up as their full authentic selves and get everything out on the table so that we can really work through, like, okay, what's a good middle ground for us, right? So I don't know, I'll use like, let's say, smoking as an example, right? Like, maybe somebody might think that, they're constantly being criticized for smoking, and people are constantly telling them, like, oh, do you know what happens, to your body if you smoke? It's like, oh, no, I don't. And so if your partner's going to feel like they constantly have to hide the fact that they're smoking, then what that means is that they're not able to be honest about their coping strategies, and let's just say that somehow that smoking interferes with the relationship in a certain way. Then you're not really able to kind of like talk through these things, and so I think that the goal really is, when we can show some level of understanding, like, hey, I know that this is something that you struggle with, but this is how it impacts me. Then we're really able to kind of sit down, get it all on the table, and figure out, like, okay, like, is there another way that maybe you can cope with that so that it doesn't affect my health? If you really need to, go and smoke, and, maybe do it when you're at work, maybe, but not when you're at home. And because even when you're trying to hide it, if you're going to lie to me about it, I smell it, and, that's going to create conflict. So yeah, like, I think that unconditional acceptance really means to, like, let's try to avoid criticizing. Let's try to let go of our expectation that we're going to be able to change our partners and who they are. We need to generally accept, like, okay, like, what are they coming into this relationship with, and how can we work together to kind of co-create a life together that makes sense for the both of us and respects the needs of both people.
And certainly constant criticism is not a changing technique that works.
We're just finding that out, huh?
Your fourth quality to improve for relationship skill building is responsiveness. Tell us what that is all about in 2 ways we can get better at it.
So responsiveness is really our ability to show our partners how accessible we are. So again, if we go back to emotional security, what's the purpose of having somebody in our lives if we can't depend on them, right? So, I guess an example would be, I don't know, my tire blew in the middle of the highway, and I need to call my partner to help me problem solve. This doesn't always mean that my partner's going to, show up immediately and drop everything that they're doing to help me. But, I don't know anything about tires and who I'm supposed to call. And so at least when I pick up the phone, I can expect that my partner's either going to pick up and help me, or they must be doing something busy where they're not picking up my phone. So responsiveness really has to do with, like, can I depend on this person to be there for me and to be responsive to my needs when I have them? And when we're talking about responsiveness, it could be something a little bit more extreme, like what we're talking about right now, where I really need them for something, and they're able to respond to me in a positive way. But it could also be something a little bit more mild, such as like, I want to share this funny video with you. How are you going to respond to your partner when they want to share a funny video with you? Are you going to be like, oh God, like, what do you want now? And if they show you, it's just like, that's not that funny. Or are you going to, actually be curious about what they're showing you and why they're trying to show you? Is that they're trying to connect with you in those moments. And the more positively we respond to them, the more it encourages more of that connection between the two of you, where you're able to, generally share things with each other. I think that going back to what I was saying, even though about like how we respond to our partners, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that responsiveness means that we always have to drop everything in order to be there for our partners. But I think sometimes we also have to be very careful about how we respond to our partners when they need us for things. For example, I don't know if you're able to relate to this, but this kind of goes back to being that independent and, highly efficient person, is that, people that tend to be highly independent, we have created this lifestyle that just kind of belongs to us, right? So it's like, I fit everything in very tightly on my schedule. And so, it allows me to be highly efficient and, I'm able to, tackle things. But when somebody needs me, that's where I'm thrown off. And, that might sometimes cause me to, be a little bit irritated. And, and that in itself could also discourage our partners to come to us for help in the future. If it's just like, oh, what do you need? Like just that sigh sometimes.
Yes.
That's all it takes for us to communicate to our partner that I'm not here for you.
It's so simple to push people away and close the door. You describe warmth as a quality of interpersonal relating that is positive, intimate, and inviting. How do we go about making that a bigger part of our most important relationships?
I think that, generally, I think that this is one of part of one of John Gottman's research, where I think he said, like, you have to have at least 5 positive interactions to counteract a negative one. And, I really believe in that. And the reason why this can be hard, though, is because, again, as humans, we are primed for survival. And so what that means is that, again, the more trauma experiences that we've had, the more likely we're going to be focusing on negatives and focusing on problems in the environment, and trying to fix things. And so what that does to relationships is that, if we're just constantly like, pointing out the negatives and not being intentional about pointing out the positives in the relationships, it can really contribute to this general sense that, like, atmosphere in the relationship that just doesn't feel good, right? Like, it's always about complaints. And when I complain about something, and, my partner one day is going to feel overwhelmed, and that's going to lead to conflict, right? Like, they come home at the end of a workday, and it's like, hey, you didn't do the dishes like you promised, right? And so that can really contribute to just a very negative interaction. And so when interactions frequently feel negative, what do? As humans, we're constantly looking for a sense of calm and peace. So if the relationship in itself frequently feels negative, then we're going to look for escape versus moving towards the relationship. But the more positive that relationships feel, the more that we want to move towards that relationship and spend more time with our partners, which cause them to feel wanted and feel loved, and that will reinforce more togetherness. So some things that we can do to try to foster that a little bit more is just to try to be more intentional about positive interactions. Not just even positive interactions, but even positive thoughts. So, for example, this is one thing that I really love about my relationship with my husband is that we're not afraid to be affectionate towards each other. So I remembered even, when I was, I think probably even like writing this section of the book, I was just kind of like, sitting at the computer desk and, and it just kind of, my husband walked by and I looked at him and I just got this like sudden sense of, like joy when I saw him. So I got up out of my computer and I gave him a kiss just for no reason. So I think that, by being able to do more of those kinds of positive signs, those positive gestures, what it does is that it really kind of adds to like a positive atmosphere in the relationship. And it just makes you want to be around each other more. Like when we go out with each other, people are always noticing, it's like, hey, you guys really like each other, huh? It's like, well, we do actually.
Yeah, that's lovely. It really is. Could you talk about unrealistic relationship expectations, which I believe feed so many unspoken resentments that pile up and suffocate relationship building?
Yeah, so many. I think that, a lot of it could even start from what we learn about the types of characteristics to look for in relationships. At least for me, I remember growing up, and this goes for a lot of my friends and a lot of people that, I still see when when I'm working with people on like finding partners, is that there's this list that we create. There's like, I want my partner to be like this, like this, like this. And, what I've discovered through working with relationships and doing relationship research is that, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for security. We're looking for, a relationship that feels good for us, where we feel good about ourselves and we feel good about being in the relationship with this person and not just all of these certain qualities. And so I think that, when we start making these lists, it makes sense why we might do that sometimes, because again, like if we didn't grow up with a lot of emotional security, we might not know that that's what we're looking for. And when we did grow up with emotional security, it's not like, oh, my mom told me that this is what I should look for, but it's almost like we just naturally know what feels good and what doesn't feel good to us. So I think that that's why people who grow up in more secure relationships tend to end up in secure relationships, because it feels off for them when they're being mistreated, or it feels off for them when somebody's not listening to them. So naturally, they want to gravitate towards relationships where they do feel safe because they know that that exists. But people who grew up in in households that weren't very secure, they don't have that framework. So the only thing that they can really do is like, well, what does Hollywood tell me that I should look for? What do these, what did my parents say about the kind of partner that I should be looking for? Oh, what seems, to make my friends like certain people. So we start creating these arbitrary lists, and that causes us to sometimes like overlook important qualities of relationships. And in exchange, to kind of like check off these check boxes. So I think that that really oftentimes sets the relationship up for failure, because it's like, okay, well, I really like this person. They're really nice to me, but they don't make enough money. And so yeah, that's where it kind of can sometimes set the relationship up negatively. But I think that another huge expectation that I also see is that people expect relationships to be smooth all the time, right? Like, give me $1 for every time that I hear a client tell me like, oh yeah, like, we got in an argument. I'm not sure if this is, the right relationship for me. It's like, hold on there. There's so many things that we can do about that. So I think that, the expectation that the right relationship for me is going to be smooth, that we are going to be whatever it means to be compatible, or we have a lot of things in common. The truth is that, like, what fun is that, right? Like, if I just ended up finding a partner who, was exactly like me and we have a lot of similarities, that's not fun at all. Like, my husband, he's Mexican. And I remember that growing up, one time I heard my dad say, and my dad, he's a very, logical, rational person. But I remember my dad saying, he's like, kind of thinking out loud about, like, his feelings about interracial relationships. And he's like, but like, something that I kind of see as a problem, though. He's like, what do you eat for dinner even? Like, how do you get past that? And for me, I'm just like, I feel like me and my husband have the most colorful relationship because, he gets to experience my culture, I get to experience his culture. And we're not even just talking about, like, culture. We're even talking about, like, how things are perceived, why cultures are a certain way and do things a certain way. And we get to kind of blend, our values and come up with something that just strictly belongs to us. And that makes me feel like this is a very strong relationship because, like, over the years, like, we have done so much work to integrate our lives and our values that, like, I don't think, anybody else can replicate this.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah.
I think the differences make things so much more interesting. My husband was in a Chinese cooking class, and apparently somebody in the class had been in a workshop of mine, and she said, "You're married to Rhoda?" And he said, "Yeah." And she said, "Wow, you guys are really different," and it's like, yeah, that's right. And it's a very interesting relationship. So I'm completely with you on that. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to share?
I think we've covered a lot, and thank you so much for all of these wonderful questions. The one thing, though, that I will say that I constantly find that I want the world to know about relationships is, don't be afraid of conflict.
Yes.
Do not be afraid of it, because that's literally how you build resilience, how you improve your communication skills, how you build that intimacy that's ultimately going to take you guys very far into the future. So yeah, like I would just say, don't be afraid of that.
I love that. Dr. Betsy, please remind us of your newest book title and website where people can find out more about you.
So my book is called The Couple Skills Workbook. And if you ever want to find me, I'm starting to come back onto Instagram, but if you were to look up my Instagram, Love Always Dr. Betsy, I talk a whole lot about relationships and how our childhood affects our relationships.
All right. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us create better content and reach more listeners. You can follow me on Instagram at Rhoda on Couples.
Thank you for listening to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and help get the word out. To learn more or connect with Rhoda, visit therapyideas.net.